All right, from the studio of Fairbank City, we're very grateful that Miki Berenyi accepted our invitation to our show. Miki, welcome to my humble podcast.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
No problem. Let's go to the beginning. I mean, what was the motivation to write this book? We are talking with Miki about this great book, Finger Cross, that was released here in the United States recently, I think. It's a great read, a lot of adventure, great picture, complicated lifestyle, but that's what life is sometimes, So we don't we don't choose where we are born and so on. So what was the motivation to write the book to begin with?
I got asked to write it. So I was approached by a publisher, and then I thought, okay, it took me a while to think about it, but then I thought, okay, let's give it a go. So I didn't really, I didn't have a plan. I didn't really know about writing books. I had to get a bit of advice, but I tell you what, I do think that I'm someone who, opportunity comes and you think, being asked is always quite a sort of privilege, I think. I'm
Sure.
not particularly good at self-motivation and self-confidence. So if somebody asks me and they seem trustworthy and they seem to know what they're talking about, then I think, okay, well, they clearly believe I can do this. So I'll give it a go. Yeah.
And then I suppose you still keep like a diary with all the shows and the venues and adventure.
Not anymore.
Or from memory.
No. I used to. So until I was, kind of in my 30s or whatever, I used to. To be honest, once I had the children, there's just no time. Writing a diary is writing a diary is quite self-indulgent, and once you have children, there is literally no time for any of that.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I believe your parents, for folks out there that you don't know about your life, I think your parents met in Tokyo. Your dad was a reporter on the Olympics as a freelancer when he ended up meeting your mom in Tokyo, right, in Japan. Yeah.
Yeah, 1964 Olympics.
Yeah. Oh man, the sun is coming up. I need to move. Oh.
Yes, you're bathed in sunlight.
It's a beautiful day, man. Here, so keeps the outdoors. Own a house and with some land around that. So, hey, what can you do? All right. So, in general term, I read your book carefully, and then the book is divided like in two parts. The first part is your family upbringing, your family, your dad, your mom, and then the second part of the book, if you will, you talk about music. You, in many ways, and in general terms, I don't mean to be intrusive. You had like a very difficult upbringing, if one, and like a solitary life, and but you did it. You managed. I don't know how difficult was your life and deal with your dad, your mom, and a divorce early age. It's always difficult, but
I mean, I know what you mean, because it was chaotic, but I don't know if it was, it wasn't like extreme hardship. There's some unpleasant shit in there, but I think, the maybe the issue is that if you have quite an unusual upbringing, there's not really much to relate to, with other people. You don't really know which bits of it are, really, really bad or really, really good, because they're mostly out of other people's experiences, right? And I think I know people who have had maybe less dramatic lives, but there was as much, pain or sorrow or loss. I mean, God, people I know who had I think, a much worse time. They may have lost a parent when they were a child, or they never knew their father, or, all sorts of terrible things happen to people throughout their lives. And all sorts of good things happen as well. I think the thing is when you've got quite a dramatic life that isn't most people's experiences, and to a large extent, I was trying to demystify that. It's not like a lot of what I write about is, I think, about, yes, the kind of crazy aspect of it, but I hope I write about it in a way that most people can relate to imagining themselves in that position, rather than looking at it like some kind of freak show, that it's, you know, I mean, funny enough, I'm just reading at the moment, there's a book by Moon Unit Zappa, Frank Zappa's daughter. Frank Zappa, and she's gonna I've got an early copy, and clearly her, you know, growing up in that environment, I mean, she's almost exactly the same age as me, right? And again, very charismatic father, very different mother to mine. But there was a lot that I really related to, even though her life is completely different to mine, right? And I think that that's what you get when you read a book like that. Hopefully you find the bits where you think, oh my God, I so recognize that, you know, however unusual their life is, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. But you are, you know, you could have ended a lot worse, and you are resilient. So, you know, eventually, you know, music came to your life, and you did okay, and have a couple of kids, and a husband, a person who love you, and you look at the end. Yeah, so but looking back, a lot of issues with your dad and your mom, you know, and who am I to criticize? But you managed. You are resilient, and you were part or are part of a great band, you know. So it's I'm happy in a way, many ways that
for sure. But you know, I think in a funny way, you know, I know my parents are. The people can have their opinions on how they come out of it in the book, but you know, in truth, they were very resilient. They went through all kinds of, you know, difficulties themselves. So I just think, you know, I mean, I'm downplaying it a bit. You know, I think there's a kind of exceptionalism that I don't really subscribe to. I think everybody gets through life in the best way that they can. And I think that, you know, I certainly didn't want anyone to feel sorry for me or particularly admire me and go, oh God, how amazing that you got through that. I mean, I think everybody gets through whatever crap is thrown at them. And, you know, it's about celebrating the good and trying to sort of deal with the bad, you know.
Sure, I understand. And man, the sun. So let's go back to, you know, when your parents, you know, got divorced, you were living with your dad and your mom, and what you remember? What kind of, I don't know, when you were, I don't know, your teenagers, I don't know, 10, 12, 13 years old. What you remember? What kind of music were you listening at the time when you were that age?
I mean, I didn't grow up. You know, there was music in my house. My mum listened to quite a lot of music. My grandfather did. When I was in Japan. I mean, my grandmother did as well.
Yep.
You know, but not in a particularly kind of, I don't know. Again, I don't really know. It's like a lot of people that I talk about, you know, the point at which they talk about music and their kind of passion for it is usually the point at which they are a bit independent of that. I know there are a couple of people, like you're saying that your father had thousands of records and you grew up around that. I would say that is unusual, right? Most people have like a family that might listen to the radio and they like a bit of music, and it's just something that, you know, it's there everywhere, isn't it? Right? For most people.
Yeah.
But I don't think any of my family had a particular, you know, massive passion for music that was, you know, a huge influence on me. And a lot of the music I listened to, you know, I don't know, it was on the TV or it was in Hollywood films and musicals. And then when I went to school, you know, it becomes a way that people bond, don't they? You know, it's like movies, music, cooking, whatever cultural kind of stuff goes on. These are all things that we have our kind of, you know, first moments with that are memorable to us, but they're usually quite pedestrian. And I think a lot of the music I listened to was in the charts. It was already popular. I didn't have any older siblings, so there was no route for me to get into very obscure music. So you know, it's just kind of what I grew up with. I mean, probably the first music that I remember really getting kind of excited about, although to be fair, I was very excited about like film music. I thought the music in like My Fair Lady or Oliver or Disney films was great, you know what I mean? But probably the first, you know, even that, I find it difficult to credit, you know, myself with any sort of, you know, real musicality about it. It was more that, you know, I was at a school and lots of people were listening to a certain kind of music and I wanted to have friends. So you get into the same kind of music. And, you know, the tipping point at which you end up pursuing your own journey, I think is quite difficult to nail down. You know, I think for me, music has, it's always been related to the people that I'm around. You know, I didn't go off on my own and suddenly get into, I don't know, Mongolian folk music or something. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Sure, I know. Yeah, I know.
it was usually whatever was around, and it was usually whatever was kind of in a social environment that meant you could join in and enjoy it, and then you kind of take it away to yourself, and then you kind of immerse yourself. And you know, London in the 80s was, you know, this is a long time ago, so people didn't check your ID when you went to gigs and things. So, you know, at 15 you could get into a pub gig and go and see some band that you barely knew like one song by, and find yourself immersed in a world, you know, a kind of social scene, but also a band. It was very immediate and it was very captivating, and there was a lot of it, and it was very cheap. You know, you could go to a gig any night of the week for like £1. I didn't drink. Well, I drink like half a cider and I'd be drunk. So it's not like I had to spend a lot of money. You know what I mean? Yeah, there were gigs all the time. So it wasn't that big a deal.
Did you ever attend the Marquee Club as well? I imagine. Right? Mm-hmm. That's a legendary place. And anybody in the music plane is somehow, all the big name, all the people that I admire, they play there at the Marquee one way or another. I don't know. For me, music, it's true that I grew up in a family where music sort of was important, but I discovered early life that I wouldn't be a musician. I wasn't interested. I wanted to lead a school band. And, you know, that was, 40 years ago. So we didn't have the internet, social media, any of the stuff didn't exist, right? And nowadays it's a lot easier because I can go to Spotify, which is a repo for band. That for me is great. You know, I spend $10 a month and I discover many bands, and I discover many bands, and machine learning algorithm recommend me, if you like this, should like this, and so forth. So it's a great way to nowadays to discover new bands and new music. I'm always in the lookout for new things, and where I live, since I live in the border with two states, with Maryland and Washington D.C., every band comes this way. So I mean, literally every band playing right here. So hopefully you will next year with the trio. You were in New York, but you didn't come back to. You need to come down to DC play. So there are many venues. So I'm very lucky, and I know that a lot of people don't have perhaps the financial means to see a lot of bands, but you know, I'm lucky that I have a good job and I'm able to see a lot of things. So music has given me in many ways, you know, a lot of satisfaction in my life. So I'm very, very lucky for that. The sun is driving crazy. You know, we don't pick our parents, obviously, and we don't know how marriages will turn out to be, but you didn't have this question in general terms. I don't mean to be intrusive, but you didn't have an idea of boundary of acceptable behavior, right? You pretty much were you left to your own devices. Your parents had been divorced at the time, and you did pretty much what you wanted, right? I don't know who am I to criticize that? But it's different. Let me put it to you that way, right? And for you, you were a little girl, and for you was normal and unacceptable, right? Unless in the equivalent of middle school or high school, you were talking to other kids and you say, what did you do last night? And I don't know, I watch TV until 1 o'clock in the morning or whatever. Right? So,
I mean,
right? So,
I think, this is just an issue about parenting. I know people who grew up in very, very strict households, for instance,
yeah,
and that wasn't necessarily good. Or they went to boarding school, which was all rules, and that wasn't necessarily good, and it made them unhappy. I think the difficulty is that there's a certain kind of thinking, I think, that was around in the sort of, those people in the 60s and early 70s were slightly infected with this idea that children are these kind of free spirits and we should let them do whatever they want to do, and they're kind of, they're ruined by socialization. I mean, my parents weren't hippies, but I think they kind of went along with some of that because it suited them, But the problem with that thinking is that children don't have any experience, so they don't know what is dangerous, what is, can cause them harm. And that's what parents are there for. And I think, parenting is really hard, and it's a full-time job. And I do think that, I forgive those people. People had been through a war, it had been a difficult time, but I do think it was a bit of a get-out clause to say, oh, we can just let our kids be these free spirits and they kind of look after themselves. And you kind of think, oh, well, that's very convenient for you, isn't it, as a parent? So you don't actually have to do anything.
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't mind, I wanna pause the recorder and go inside because the sun is driving me crazy. Give me 1 minute. Okay?
Sure.
Let me move the computer. Let me get my water. Then yeah, we are good. Much better, much nicer here.
Yes, you were getting a bit bleached out.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned boarding school. A lot of people in South America, for a wealthy family, go to boarding school. I think you guys here, at least in the United States, we call it private. In the UK, you call it public. It's the other way around. And I don't know, it's like pushing the kids out of the house, as if you don't want to have the kids around. We send you to a boarding school, private school. I don't know. As I say, life is complicated, so I don't know.
I mean, I know what you mean. I know that, like Emma, when I first met Emma, she'd come from a boarding school, and she actually really liked it there. So she was pretty happy there, and she was quite annoyed that she wasn't going to be staying there. And I mean, I'm with you. I find it baffling. Like, what is the point in having children if at the age of 7 is the kind of often the standard in this country that you send them off to some boarding school? So I literally don't understand it. I would need to talk to someone who totally believes in it and can explain to me why it's a great idea. I personally think it's appalling. But I tell you where I kind of get it is someone I knew who, when they were a teenager, so they didn't go when they were a small child. I think they might have gone when they were about 11 or something. And they did say that, I kind of get that more. I wouldn't do it myself, but I get the idea that sometimes there's a huge amount of conflict in households with teenagers, and I've seen it happen all over the place. It can be really, really, really hard. It isn't always, but it can be. And I can see how being in a different environment may, I don't just mean for the parents to get them out of the way because they're being annoying or they're being unhandleable, but even for the children, like I've known 1 or 2 people who did say that they actually really loved being at boarding school when they were teenagers. So I can't, who am I to know? Personally, I think it's a terrible idea.
The same here. Anyway, especially the early years, 7 or 8 to 10, where both hopefully people grew up in a loving family with dad and mom working or both working part-time and try to make it. For me, at least that is my case. Both my parents were professional. I went to a private school, but I wasn't boarding school. I was a crazy kid anyway. So even with the best school in the country, I would have done the music thing. I was chasing girls, drinking beer, wanted to listen to music, right? So whether I have been a private school or Catholic school or boarding, that's who I was, who I am, independent of my parents. But I kind of lucky that I grew up in a good family. So, feel free, how you end up meeting Emma at the time? You guys you met Emma when you were very young, right?
I think I was about 14. So she, like I said, she was at a boarding school in a place called Littlehampton that's near the sea.
Yeah.
And she came to our school, and that was it really. We just became friends. We were in the same class, and I think some of the reasons why we were drawn to each other, we were both only children, so we didn't have any siblings. Her family background was quite odd as well. Her parents were a lot older than her. I mean, there's a whole story there, but that's not my story to tell. And
Sure.
and I think we both had, I think we were both a little spoiled as well. We had a lot of freedom in our respective homes. So we were able to go out and go to gigs and not get in trouble with any parents, so we had a lot of freedom. And we were quite indulged, maybe. That's, rather than spoiled, I think we were quite indulged. And I think, my parents, I mean, it's funny, maybe, Emma's parents slightly disapproved of her being in a band and wanting to be in that world. But it didn't really affect her in a way that it could stop her, right? My parents completely, indulged me in being a musician, and they didn't, in some level, I thought maybe they just don't care, but actually they were quite happy to celebrate it, in a way that I did know other people whose parents would be a little bit out of good concern, going, well, this is fine, but when are you going to get a proper job? You need to think about your future, and you need to get a real job and all of that. So, I think in that respect, me and Emma were similar in that we didn't really have the parents that were kind of hectoring us to, pursue a proper kind of career, in completely two very different ways. I mean, I think Emma's mother would have loved her to get married and, marry a wealthy man and become a housewife, but because she couldn't make her do it, and she wasn't really going to get anywhere doing that. So Emma just kind of ignored, that aspect. But in that respect, I think we were both able to kind of do what the hell we wanted, really. But having said that, we didn't have a huge amount of self-confidence, to do that kind of thing on our own. So we sort of clung to each other in terms of forming the band. And it was, it felt a lot easier to kind of, be alongside each other trying to make this thing happen. Certainly, I don't know if either of us would have done it on our own.
Sure.
And, especially because it was also because we weren't trained musicians. I mean, a lot of the reason we joined a band was because it was a period in sort of, particularly independent music in certainly in London, where everyone was in a bloody band. Lots of people barely knew how to play their instruments, and they'd kind of formed these bands post-punk because it was just a kind of DIY, well, why the hell not, and that was, quite it was a facilitating environment. It's like you want to join in, and why the hell not? But in terms of actually being good musicians or whatever, no, we had to learn as we went along, and then you've got to try and build that confidence. But neither of us felt that we were particularly naturally gifted. It was just something we wanted to do.
Gotcha. Yeah. I think you mentioned in the book that when you were, I think, 15, your dad for your for your birthday gave you bought you a hi-fi system, and you spent a lot of time listening to records that you borrowed from the public library and mixing tapes and I don't know, recording for TV back in the day. We have VHS and beta. And, Top of the Pops will be on their own in your country on the television, and you will get to know a lot of bands. And that was a great time to go to. Because I did the same. Go to the public library. I didn't have a lot of money to borrow record and get to know stuff. And
I mean, it's funny, isn't it? Because you're right. You mentioned earlier that having things like Spotify, and it's like, you can access millions of songs and music and blah, blah, blah. I think what's quite interesting to me is that although that is now there, right, it's not like the entire world is now into really like interesting and innovative music, or that because everyone has that facility, they are suddenly incredibly well attuned to listening to music. So it just makes me laugh, because actually for my generation, it was not uncommon, never mind the VHS, right? Pre-VHS, people with those kind of portable sort of tape recorders sitting in front of the telly and just pressing play record, and holding it up to the television and listening to that, and still listening to that, like terrible quality. You can hear your grandmother making tea in the background or whatever, but this is all you have, and that's enough, And I think that it's interesting that you can provide all the tools to people to hear the most amazing music from any era, from any corner of the world. And unless you've got the curiosity and the spark and the real sort of want to do it, it doesn't make any difference, I mean, there's my dad's generation. My dad was never that musical really, but, a friend of his, Peter, who is, he became a broadcaster and he's very into jazz. And when he was talking about kind of being in Hungary when the communists were in, before he kind of, escaped, he said that, jazz was actually illegal. So and that's why he loved it, right? That's why he fell in love with jazz, because he said it to him, it was the sound of freedom. And I think that it's that kind of connection. Like you can dish up every piece of music in the world to someone. And if it doesn't do it for them, or they don't have the spark, it doesn't matter, does it, really? And someone can be in complete love with music and only have like 6 records. Do you know what I mean? So.
No, I know exactly. Well, you have two kids, right? Are they into music? They go to concert like you used to go, and nowadays it's more expensive. But they go to Spotify or the Bandcamp or YouTube. They are into music like you were, or no?
Yeah, they're both into music, both in very different ways. But my son, who I literally just took up to it's not a university, but it's like a music college that he started at. So he's literally 2 days ago, we drove him up there. So he's a drummer. So he's doing a music degree.
Wow.
And, my daughter did art, but she's really into bands, and she's in a local kind of scene, so they both have their own things. Like some of the stuff that Ivan is into, I have no fucking idea, right? It's like grime, and I can't even remember the terminology. But yeah. They're into their own things a bit, but yeah, it's a big thing for both of them.
Do you listen to a lot of music? When you go to a supermarket or drive into your job or doing the chores at home, or.
Do you know what's quite weird is I do listen to quite a lot of music, but actually I'm not the kind of person in the house who seeks out new music, right?
Really?
And I think when I was a teenager and when I was really obsessed with music, you know, I would just, you know, kind of like be grabbing at things and going to see bands and all of that. It's quite time consuming, you know, and so I think I've become the person. So Moose, you know, my partner, he's the one who will, you know, really seek stuff out, and then he'll just play it and I go, I like this one, you know, but I think maybe because music was so overwhelmingly all consuming for me, I'm not very good at being very casual about it. So if we play a show or something and there's a support band that I like, then I'll listen to them, you know, but I would never have found them if they weren't literally in the same room as me playing. So.
Yeah. But also because you are a musician, right? You have seen so many bands. You have been Lollapalooza and this and that, and with your partner as a musician. So I'm not a musician, so for me, I'm always in the process of discovering. I'm obsessed about music. I'm always discovering new band. I follow, I don't know, 100 or 200, 300 bands. And I'm always looking for this stuff, right? For film score, for jazz, for rock. I mean, I went to see Boy George and the Squeeze. I'm going to see Hans Zimmer and Lisa Gerrard on Friday. And all the classic rock band, I'm always see them. And but I'm always in the lookout for new, you know, I don't know, I'm never satisfied, I suppose. I'm always looking for the next, the new way to do things, or
I mean, for sure. But maybe if I didn't have these people in my life, I would work a little bit harder at it. Right? But, you know, Ollie, who is in our band, the bass player, he runs a record shop, right? So every time we get in the bloody car, he's got some new thing that I've never heard of. So he can do the work for me, right?
Oh, okay. That's
he
good.
can bring it to me.
That's good. In the book you mentioned, feel free to elaborate, you mentioned a funny story about how you ended up meeting Tom Bailey from the Thompson Twins, of course, that I saw him recently last month. They were playing with a bunch of bands from the period, including Thomas Dolby here in DC. So what memory you have of Tom Bailey?
I mean, me and Emma were just like, you know, teenage fangirls. But, you know, I mean, there was a point at that time in London, right? I think pop stars were quite accessible. You know, they weren't kind of driving around in limousines with bodyguards. You know, they'd be getting the tube, you know, and they'd be going to the same shops that everybody else goes to. And so I think, you know, we just kind of, I don't know, we saw him in Flip or something at some, you know, it was like a kind of American sort of clothing store, and then we got his autograph, and then we kept bumping into him and blah blah blah. So anyway, he ended up, you know, being very sweet with us, and he, you know, he was mixing a record, and he ended up inviting us in. I mean, you have to read the book to get all the bits. I see what makes me laugh though, right, is when me and Emma were first in a band, when Lush was starting, and we would get interviewed. And of course, they always ask, like, oh, you know, what bands have you been into and blah, blah, blah. We used to tell this story, right? We used to talk about the Thompson Twins. No one ever printed it, right? Because those people thought it was really uncool. Okay, so they just would not mention it. And it's really funny that since I wrote the book, there's quite a few, like, actual, you know, people in bands who were my contemporaries who are like, oh my God, I used to love the Thompson Twins. I used to have like a little Thompson Twins haircut and all that. So it's quite funny how the press and the media could, you know, if they thought someone was uncool. Now, it's one thing if they think it's uncool, fine. But even if they're interviewing bands who reference them, they would crush that. You know? And
those two guitarists, right? Like,
Well, I
like,
guess, I mean, I do think a lot of the people who wrote for the music press were quite young themselves. So they had this whole idea of cool and what's not, you know. But it just made me laugh because I had Martin Carr, who was in the Boo Radleys, you know, messaging me the other day because he'd read the book and he was talking about being a Thompson Twins fan. And I thought, my God, if back in the 90s, like those music journalists had like, I don't know, there's no way they would have printed like Martin going on about the bloody Thompson Twins. So it just made me laugh, you know.
yeah, no, that's true. Plus, you know, at the time, as you say, it's hard to believe that the internet didn't exist at the time. So people will go to different bookstore and buy the newspaper and Melody Maker and NME at the time, and or magazines, or, you know, that to, at least in my case, to discover new bands and so forth. But I never put too much attention to the lyrics. I don't care what everybody else think about the band or does. You know, I want to be me, and I want to discover the world. And you know, if 100 people don't like XYZ band, I don't care. I like it. I don't care. You know, I'm the one going to a show. I'm the one buying the music. I'm the one interviewing people or writing something about them and so forth. But you know, it's
I mean, I kind of get that when you're young, you know, obviously you grow up, like I said, you know, you grow up with whatever's around you. And I do understand that when you become a teenager, there is a whole identity crisis of, you know, wanting to become the person you want to become. And if it's music, there is a kind of, you know, the idea of a musical taste, and, you know, that certain things are seen as like a bit kind of gauche or a bit obvious, do you know what I mean? And there's that, I think if you asked anyone who's like 16, 17 years old what they were into when they were 13, they would just not want to talk about it, right? You know? Because you feel almost shame, and you're trying to develop like good taste and all of that. And I think when you come through the other end of that, then you kind of chill out a bit more, and you can actually admit to some of the stuff that you liked and go, well, I stand by it. I think it's a good record and blah, blah, blah. But you need a bit of self-confidence to be able to do that, because I think when you're younger, you feel that someone's just going to dismiss you for having bad taste, you know. And it takes a while to catch up with everyone, you know. At that point, you still haven't heard or experienced a lot of stuff. And there's plenty of people ready to tell you that you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. So, you know, I do forgive it in young people being a bit snobby.
Yeah, all the kids, you know, if we were in high school when they were 14, 15, they want to make friends in school. They want to fit in. So you follow the crowd, right? If everybody, you know, if nobody knows about this, we're talking about Thompson Twins, you know, none of you like them, then you wouldn't mention anything because you want to be popular in school and fit in, that kind of stuff, right? So.
And also, you know, people do have different tastes. People do have different things that make them, you know, kind of buzz. I mean, I got asked recently about, you know, Taylor Swift, and I suspect that maybe I was being asked in a way that I should sneer at it, you know, and go, oh, it's not really my thing. Now, the thing is it's not really my thing because I'm not a teenage girl. If I was, I'd probably think it's amazing, right? But I'm 57 years old, and it's just not, you know, it's not really the thing I'm going to rush out and listen to. I don't think that Taylor Swift gives a flying fuck, right? Okay. But, you know, sometimes there's this sort of need for people to want to slag things off and say, well, oh, yeah, it's shit. And don't you think it's shit as well? And, you know, they want to be agreed with. I don't really care. I mean, if you locked me in or abandoned me on a desert island and only gave me Taylor Swift records, I'd probably fucking come off that island and say that she was the best artist in the world. I have no idea, right?
Sure.
But I just think sometimes there's a sort of, you know, there's music that doesn't really do it for me, you know. I think it's okay, but I'm just not going to try that hard. And I do think you have to try quite hard. There are records that might intrigue me, and I think, I mean, I remember sort of listening to Captain Beefheart and thinking this music is so confusing, but there's something that is actually working for me. But it's really hard work, right? but I put in the hours because I actually, but you need something. Whereas I'll be honest with you, something like Frank Zappa, I just sit there and I go, it's just too much for me.
Of course.
I'm very happy for people to think that he's a genius or whatever. I just can't. I haven't put the work in. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And on the other hand, right? If everybody were to like the same type of book, the same type of music, the same type of clothes, then we will live in a very boring world, I suppose. So it's good that people.
Well, on some level, we do. I mean, on some level, we do. I think there's an awful lot of people who claim to like, oh, I love music, they say. And you think, well, you don't really, do you? You just listen to kind of, I don't know, if I mean, I feel bad now because I've literally said that I just listen to whatever fucking cunt falls in my lap. But I have to be I happen to be very lucky and have people around me with very eclectic tastes. And I think there is a kind of curiosity about music that if you really feel, drawn to it, then you can't help but explore it on some level. And I think there's an awful lot of people who don't, it's fine. I'm a bit like that with art, if I'm honest. I know fuck all about art. You can take me to a gallery and I'll go, yeah, that's nice. But I don't really think about it that much. And I think there's a lot of people who feel the same way about music, They want to dance to it a bit and they might want some sort of background stuff going on, but they're not really that interested. And that's fine,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think you mentioned in the book that I didn't know that, but I think that Emma joined a band called the Rover Girl. And then later on, she asked you to join the band. I think was the first time you guys played together. Yeah, that was before Lush Voices, right?
Well, to be honest, I think before she joined the Rover Girls, we used to kind of like, well, I say rehearse. I mean, there wasn't on the level of a rehearsal, but it was, we'd sit there and try and strum through songs together and maybe try and just get something to sound like something approaching a song. And, we were just learning together, and it was probably more fun than learning separately. I think a lot of boys, I mean, maybe more girls now, but certainly when I was growing up, a lot of boys were quite happy to sit in their bedrooms and just, learn kind of heavy metal songs or whatever, guitar riffs and all of this sort of stuff, And I think maybe there's an edge with boys of a kind of, willing to put the work in because they want to emerge. They've got this idea that I'm going to be the next, guitar hero. So they put the work in. In my experience at that time, girls didn't really do that. It was much more of a social thing. So girls would play together, or they'd, or they'd be in a choir, or they'd be in a kind of, school stuff or whatever. That's where their talent. They didn't really sit at home for hours and hours and hours and hours learning how to play on their own. And I think me and Emma were the same. So it was more fun to practice together. And I think when she joined the Rover Girls, I mean, I literally went for one day and did some backing vocals, and I thought, no, this is not what I want to do. So then I was playing the bass.
Because you didn't like the music, or because you were still not at the level of making a decision that I want to be a musician, or so?
If I think about it, to be honest, I think part of it was, it was quite a jokey band. I mean, it's not that they were a joke. They had kind of serious songs, but it was quite kitsch. And, they did sort of kind of Elvis covers, but, they had their own songs, but it was quite comedic and fun, right? So the girl backing singers they had were all in like kind of frilly dresses, and they were doing all kind of hand movements, and it was all, la 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 la, and I just felt a bit silly doing it. It wasn't really me, and I realised that I think it's easy for girls to be decorative because that's what they're encouraged to do. And I think that it's enormous fun to do that. I don't have a problem with it. I think that I just felt I don't want to sound pompous, like I'm better than that or something. I think it just made me feel uncomfortable. You know, I wanted to have, maybe I did just want a bit more power, you know. I don't want to be the
Sure.
fucking backing singer where, you know, I have to, you know, I don't know, look pretty and kind of coquettish and, you know, whatever. Like, that's exactly what I'm fucking trying to escape from, you know what I mean? So actually being a bit moody with a bass guitar it seems a bit more interesting, you know?
Sure. Yeah, no, I know what you mean. No, I know exactly what you mean. And okay. You guys, Lash played the first gig ever on March 1998 at a place called the Falcon in Camden. I think that was, I think that place, it doesn't exist anymore. I was looking at the internet the other day, but it launched a career of the Coldplay, the Darkness, Blur, Oasis, and so many great bands at the time. You have, probably you don't, you remember any memories of the first gig that you did that gig in March 80? Oh, no, not really.
I mean, I sort of vaguely remember it. That
Mhm.
there was a period where we were at the Falcon a lot. You know, it was
Yeah.
every week. You know, there was a bit of a scene in that a lot of the bands we knew would play. We knew the people on the door. We knew the people who worked behind the bar. And, you know, we're talking about a time before mobile phones, a time before, I mean, we didn't even have a phone. I think I was living in a flat then, and you used to have to go to the end of the street to use the payphone. So, you know, when you've got a scene like that and you know everyone's going every week or whatever, you tend to just gravitate there because you'll bump into people you know. So there was quite a scene at the Falcon. It wasn't elitist. I mean, it was a shitty little pub, and people just used to go and hang out and have a few beers and go and see a band play, you know. And it's just, I suppose what I think is quite interesting is that, you know, London is always, you know, that would not be unusual in a small town in Britain, right? That there's a venue, everyone local goes, you know what I mean? There's not much else on. It's kind of interesting that in London it was similar, actually. You know, people always say London is more like a collection of villages rather than a big city. I'm not sure that's true anymore, but certainly at the time, you know, the idea that you just go down to this one pub in Camden out of the whole of London, right? And everyone's just going there every night, you know, to just hang out and see bands and mingle with their friends, you know. So yeah, I used to love going to the Falcon. You know, it was good fun.
Yeah. I think, thank you. I think at the time you were, I think you mentioned in the book that you didn't have the confidence to see if you can just, you know, become like a lead vocal, and you were always in the background. I think Emma plays an ad in a Melody Maker newspaper auditioning for lead vocalist before you just step in, right? And it was chaos. It's not that, you know, sometimes it worked, I suppose, back in the day, put in an ad, we are this type of band looking for this type of people, and our music is such and such. And it's, I think you auditioned several ladies at the time, and none of them work out. And then you say, or maybe they put pressure on you, hey, Miki, now step up to the plate that you need to start, you know, contributing more instead of staying in the background, you know, come
I mean,
forward or
you know, you
something.
have to remember it was all very disorganized. It was very DIY. A lot of that
Yep.
scene, you know,
Yep.
I mean, yes, you know, once you're signed to a label and once you're, you know, playing bigger shows or whatever, but a lot of they're just small scenes. It's just a collection of people, and some people are in 5 bands and some people are in 3 bands, and everyone's just playing and it's quite messy. And I think because you know, it's quite, I mean, weirdly, I know someone who has had immense problems trying to find a drummer, right? And which I find quite funny because we were in the position where we didn't have a singer. That felt like, oh my God, you know, what do we do? Because a singer is like such a key identity in a
Yeah.
band. But, you know, there were a lot of women who were playing music and they were in bands and stuff. We just suddenly found that we just couldn't find anyone. So we advertised, which was quite a weird thing to do. Um, And that was, I do remember Emma saying that's part of the problem. You know, when these people turned up, most of them were lovely. You know, there was nothing wrong with them. But she did say, you know, it seems harder because it's not like, I'm not denigrating bass players or drummers or whatever, but you're looking for someone who is fronting the band. And singers often have clearly quite big egos. And that's exactly what they want to do. They want to front the band. And it's my band with Emma. And this is going to be the person who's going to be the face of it. And unless you find the right person, it's going to be very, very tricky. You know, I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe other people were more lucky. I mean, I have to add to this that we were so shit, right, that it actually felt quite embarrassing, because it's not like we were some amazing